The president abroad. Joe Biden arrives in the Middle East on a whirlwind trip. We'll tell you the focus of the visit. 40-year high. U.S. inflation hits a milestone, adding pressure to households. Fire in France. Disaster at a beloved Marian shrine. We'll have the latest. And preparing for the Pope. A report from Canada as the country gets ready for an important trip by the Holy Father. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, July 13th, 2022. President Joe Biden arrives in Israel as part of a multi-day visit to the Middle East. The trip comes as the White House faces increasing economic trouble at home, and the Catholic president's pro-abortion stance is drawing reaction from Pope Francis. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on this feast of St. Henry. I'm Tracy Sable. This is President Biden's first trip of his presidency to the Middle East. He is holding talks with Israeli, Palestinian, and Saudi Arabian officials. After touching down in Tel Aviv, the president reaffirmed the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. Meanwhile, at home, he got slammed with some harsh numbers. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, we'll get to those eye-popping inflation numbers in a moment, but first, the president in the Middle East, in a TV interview that aired today, he said he'd be willing to use force as a last resort to stop Iran's growing nuclear program. Israel considers Iran to be its greatest enemy.
Arriving in Israel, President Joe Biden says traveling there is a blessing.
Because the connection between the Israeli people and the American people is bone deep. It's bone deep.
It's his 10th visit to Israel, the first as president.
Generation after generation, that connection grows. We invest in each other. We dream together.
The president received a briefing on the country's Iron Dome and new Iron Beam missile defense systems.
I'm honored to invite.
And he also visited the Yad Vashem Memorial to Holocaust victims. The president, wearing a skull cap, was invited to rekindle the eternal flame in the memorial's Hall of Remembrance. Meanwhile, the latest inflation numbers show more pain for Americans. Surging prices for gas, food, and rent. Consumer prices soared 9.1% compared with a year earlier. President Biden released a statement saying, in part, while today's headline inflation reading is unacceptably high, it is also out of date. Energy alone comprised nearly half of the monthly increase in inflation. Today's data does not reflect the full impact of nearly 30 days of decreases in gas prices that have reduced the price at the pump by about 40 cents since mid-June. And during an interview with Televisa Univision broadcast Tuesday, Pope Francis described it as an incoherence that President Joe Biden, a Catholic, is in favor of legal abortion. Last week, President Biden signed an executive order aimed at protecting abortion access in response to the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Pope Francis said the president should talk to his pastor about the incoherence. Meanwhile, tomorrow the president meets with Israeli leaders. Then on Friday, he'll meet with Palestinian officials. He's going to emphasize a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but acknowledges that it likely would not be feasible in the near term. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
And as Owen just mentioned, inflation in the U.S. is surging to its highest level in 40 years, from food to retail to housing. Prices are up across the board. Democrats say there are solid signs of economic progress, while Republicans are blaming the Democrats' out-of-control spending. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now with the latest. Eric?
Well, good evening, Tracy. You know, at 9.1%, this is the highest rate that we've seen since 1981. It certainly caught the attention of most Americans, including Senator Rick Scott, who has been very critical of President Biden and his excessive spending spree. Rick Scott actually spoke with me as well and told me some of the things that the president can do to fix the issue right now.
Balance the budget, all right? Stop this reckless spending. We got to start paying down our debt. All right, we've got to reduce taxes because that's a cost to everybody, just like inflation is.
President Biden blames inflation on the war in Ukraine and big oil profits, and now claims the latest inflation numbers are outdated.
Now he's out there saying all these numbers aren't real. Go tell that to people who can't afford to fill up their cars. I mean, it's kind of offensive.
Republicans blame the Democrats' out-of-control spending.
As the textbook defines inflation, too many dollars chasing too few goods. And so we've got rampant runaway inflation. The American people are paying the price. And what is the Democrat prescription? To double down, to spend more, and to tax more.
House Democrats defended the idea of passing another partisan $1 trillion Build Back Better spending bill.
Our focus really is to make America as affordable as it can be for American families and everyday Americans. And we've taken legislative step after legislative step to do that.
And add arming the IRS with more agents to bring down costs.
Looking at fully funding the IRS, which actually is a net gain, so that we can fully collect the taxes in a fair way for tax cheats.
Republicans contend the current inflation is not accidental.
This is intentional. This is a desire of the left to shape the behavior of Americans because of their radical energy policies.
As the president heads to Saudi Arabia in search of more gasoline, Republicans reiterate that America can be energy sufficient on its own. All the president needs to do is just allow more drilling to take place. Republicans say that thousands of permits are currently on hold. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
And joining us now to discuss is Michael Knowles, host of The Michael Knowles Show. Michael, welcome back. Always so good to be with you. As we just mentioned, some new inflation numbers out today, up 9.1%. That is the highest in more than 40 years. Let's talk more about that, what it means for the American people and what it could signal for the Biden administration and the Democrats as we head into the midterms.
Well, it's really, really damaging to everyone in the United States, and particularly to people at the lower end of the income spectrum. Inflation is a secret tax on everybody, and especially on the poor. And I suppose now inflation is so pronounced, it's not quite so secret. We're seeing the prices of everything go up, and there are lots of factors that play into it. But I do think it is irresponsible of the White House to try to shirk all responsibility here, because the White House is engaged in policies that are directly responsible for these price increases. All we have gotten from the White House is a dismissal of responsibility and accountability, and that's not enough for people. People are struggling to fill their gas tanks. They're struggling to buy groceries. And so as a political consequence, this is going to be extremely damaging to Democrats in November.
Yeah, and these dismal inflation numbers, I mean, they come as President Biden makes his trip to the Middle East today. Your thoughts on that and what you think will come from this trip, if anything?
Well, it's pathetic that the President of the United States needs to go begging around the world with his hat in his hand and a tin cup, begging other people to lower the cost of oil or to start releasing more oil, when the United States is a very energy-rich country. We're just refusing to produce that energy right now. And so it's a bizarre situation where the President of the United States shuts down an American oil pipeline at the very same time that he greenlights a Russian oil pipeline, that the President of the United States will shut down American oil and gas production, but will encourage some of the worst actors in the world, people like Iran, to up its oil production, or Saudi Arabia, conversely, to up its oil production. Saudi Arabia, obviously a much closer ally of the United States. But the question remains, why do we need to encourage oil from other places when we could produce it ourselves?
Another thing I want to talk about, Michael, is Pope Francis and some comments that he recently made to another media outlet, saying that he essentially finds President Biden's support of legal abortion an incoherence. Your thoughts?
Well, of course, what the Holy Father said is true. It doesn't take a genius of theology to recognize that the Catholic Church's teaching, which is unchanged and unchangeable, is that human life matters from the very beginning, and abortion is inadmissible. It is unacceptable. It is intrinsically evil, and you can't have it. And so it's a really grave situation here, and it's extremely scandalous that Democratic politicians in the United States who call themselves Catholic, in some cases who call themselves devoutly Catholic, would support abortion. That is incoherent. The Holy Father could not have said anything else about this topic. And so he's encouraged President Biden to speak to his pastor about this kind of incoherence. You've seen even stronger statements from, for instance, Archbishop Cordileone in San Francisco regarding his parishioner, or a member of his flock, Nancy Pelosi, who advocates for abortion, all the while she calls herself Catholic. And that's important, too. It's important, one, because of the scandal that it causes for Catholics publicly to support abortion. But it's important for the souls of Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, especially if they continue to receive the Eucharist. They are eating their own damnation. They are imperiling their own souls and potentially leading other members of the body of Christ astray. And so it's a very serious situation.
Yeah, we're running out of time, Michael, but another story I want to get to and get your take on is one that's getting really a lot of traction right now, the revelations from Hunter Biden's laptop computer. Talk to us more about that.
Well, Hunter Biden doesn't appear to have ever committed a crime that he didn't film from multiple camera angles and then put in an electronic record, all of which are coming out. The media are focusing on his crimes with regard to drugs and sex and all of the scintillating things that make the tabloid headlines. But frankly, the even more troubling crimes regard financial corruption, regard the peddling of American influence, regard the selling out of American resources from public offices through these kinds of criminal deals. In Ukraine, Hunter Biden was accepting what were essentially just bribes from Ukrainian oligarchs. The same thing is true of members of the Chinese Communist Party. So we need a special prosecutor. We need people to look into this, because whatever personal challenges the son of the president has dealt with doesn't even interest me all that much. The political corruption that implicates even possibly the president himself, that's very important, and we certainly need to investigate that further.
Yeah, very concerning. Well, we're going to leave it right there. Michael, thank you so much for your time today. Always great to get your analysis. Coming up, another hearing on Capitol Hill on abortion in the wake of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Plus, a fire at a beloved Catholic shrine destroys part of a recently constructed chapel. A judge has temporarily blocked Louisiana's attempt for a near total ban on abortion. The statute took effect when the Supreme Court struck down Roe versus Wade. Abortion supporters claim the law is unclear. The state attorney general tweets the rule of law must be followed. During Capitol Hill testimony today, one pro-life voice says the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade was decades in the making.
The Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs corrects a 50-year wrong, one that resulted in the death of over 60 million unborn children. Roe versus Wade was premised on egregious legal errors, and its reversal is a tremendous victory for life and for the American people.
Well, the hearing comes as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tries to get several bills passed to protect so-called abortion rights. The Democratic leader says new laws are needed after the Supreme Court's decision. And joining us now is Aaron Hawley, Senior Appellate Counsel for the Alliance Defending Freedom. Aaron, welcome back. Always so great to be with you. A lot to get to today, but first, I want to play a moment from the hearing today with part of your testimony. Let's watch.
Their whole focus is on intimidating the court, and they're the ones with the radical position. Mr. Raskin just said we're radical. They're the ones who think you should take the life of an unborn child. You could take the life of an unborn child right up until their birthday.
Will the gentleman yield?
Is that accurate, Ms. Hawley?
Will the gentleman yield?
No, my question is for Ms. Hawley.
Absolutely, and I'd love to set the record straight on something Congressman Raskin said. He said that the American people support the Women's Health Protection Act. They do not. Less than 10% of the American public would support abortion up until birth for any reason. That law federalizes a right to sex and race-selective abortion.
And Aaron, I want to talk more about this interaction you had and your response that Americans do not support the Women's Health Protection Act.
Absolutely. Well, the Women's Health Protection Act is an extreme measure. As mentioned, it would allow abortions for any reason at all, up until the moment before birth. It would put us on par with only a few countries in the world, countries like North Korea and China with horrible human rights records, and would just be it would also overturn all of the laws, life-protecting laws of the states, including really common sense ones like safety and health regulations for abortion facilities, even in states that still permit abortions. It could not be a more extreme law that they are considering.
Yeah, and I know today's hearing, it lasted for several hours. I'm wondering what stood out to you, and ultimately, what do you think will come from these hearings?
So my hope is that that they'll work through these issues and arrive at some truth about what is happening in the states. A lot of the testimony today was surprising to me because it focused on things like ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages and threats to the life of the mother. And there is no state in the country that prohibits life-saving procedures in cases of an ectopic pregnancy or in cases of a miscarriage or when a woman's life is in danger. Instead, those sorts of procedures are not abortions at all because they are not made with the intent to take an unborn human life.
Yeah, and Aaron, as you know, yesterday the Senate also held a similar hearing, and there was one moment in particular that really went viral. Involved your husband, Senator Josh Hawley, and a professor from the University of California, Berkeley, and she accused her husband of being transphobic. If you don't mind, can you tell us more about that and why you think this particular interaction created so much buzz?
Well, absolutely. And of course, my husband is not transphobic. But I think the reason that this moment went viral is if you look at the tactics of pro-abortion advocates, they're not only trying to erase baby from the equation. If you listen to their testimony, they talk about other words, but never mention that there is a human being, a baby inside a pregnant woman. And now they're trying even to erase the word woman from our vocabulary. So instead of it being a woman's pregnancy, it's a person's pregnancy. And that's not biologically accurate. Women are capable of having children. It's a huge blessing. And my husband was recognizing that.
Yeah, and just stating the facts right there. All right, switching gears, as Owen reported earlier, the Justice Department is creating a task force that will be monitoring states' laws relating to abortion. This comes after President Biden signed an executive order to help protect access to abortions. I'm curious, how involved can the federal government get now that the issue of abortion is at the state level?
You know, I was really surprised even to see the creation of this federal task force. To me, it doesn't make any sense. The Dobbs decision was clear that the Supreme Court is getting out of the business of legislating abortion. It is returning that issue to the states and to the people. And this order purports to, police states for over-regulating abortion. But as the Supreme Court held, it is absolutely the right of the people to decide to protect unborn life. The Dobbs decision gives that right back to the American people.
And Aaron, before I let you go, one more thing I do want to touch on. As you know, there's been this talk about this creation of a floating abortion clinic in the waters off the Gulf Coast outside of state jurisdiction. I want to get your thoughts on that and also the legality of it.
Absolutely. So that's a complex issue. You would have a question of conflicts of law and whose law applied, if it was state law or federal law. There are certain federal bans that are currently in place. There's a federal ban on partial birth abortions, the most common procedure after a certain time period. That would be also completely within Congress's power to outlaw abortions, floating abortion clinics, as it were, if that were in federal jurisdiction.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Aaron, thank you so much for your time today. We always appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Pope Francis has named 3 women to the office responsible for evaluating new members of the church's hierarchy. It is the first time women have been part of the dicastery of bishops. 2 of the women are religious sisters. And for more on this story, including the background of the 3 women appointed, visit our partners at Catholic News Agency A fire at the Shrine of Our Lady of Lourdes in France has destroyed half of its chapels of light. The blaze broke out in the middle of the night Monday at the chapels near the Grotto of the Apparitions. The cause appears accidental. No one was hurt, but the damage is estimated near $1.5 million. Sri Lanka appears to have a new acting president, yet amid the country's declining economic problems, the protests continue. Thousands took to the streets to rally against the naming of the former prime minister as interim president. The new leader immediately declared a state of emergency in the South Asian nation. Officials are still trying to find answers to severe shortages in food, fuel, and medicine. Up next, a preview from Canada as the Holy Father prepares for his week-long apostolic trip to the country. Preparations are underway in Canada for the visit later this month of Pope Francis. The Holy Father is set to visit 3 cities. He will start in Edmonton, Alberta on Sunday, July 24th. His first public event is the next day with Indigenous leaders. It is the first visit to Canada from a sitting Pope in 20 years. Colin Flynn, EWTN Newsroom correspondent, joins us now with a preview from Canada. Colin, great to see you. So tell us, what is the feeling among the faithful there ahead of the Pope's visit?
Good evening, Tracy, from Edmonton, the capital of Alberta in the west of Canada. And as you mentioned, there is great excitement here in Canada because this is the first papal visit in 20 years, the last one being Pope John Paul II, who came in 2002. And just before we came live to you, we finished an interview with Archbishop Richard Smith. Not only is he the Archbishop of the city of Edmonton, which you can see behind me, but he's also the national coordinator of this entire papal visit across Canada. And during the interview, he spoke extensively of just how significant this visit will be to the Catholic Church in Canada, to the people of faith, but also, and most importantly, to the Indigenous community. The theme of this papal visit is walking together. And Tracy, that really is what the focus of the Pope's visit here will be. The Catholic Church, the Holy Father, walking with the Indigenous community. Their church, the Church in Canada, the nation of Canada, having been shocked by stories that have come from the residential schools over the past number of years of how the Indigenous communities have been treated throughout the years.
Yeah, and Colin, we know those school scandals, really rocked the people of Canada and really impacted the Indigenous people. What more can you tell us about the Pope's expected meetings with these communities?
Well, the stories, when you hear them, are harrowing and devastatingly sad, Tracy. There are 3 main Indigenous groups right across Canada, and Pope Francis is expected to meet with representatives from each one of them. Here in Edmonton, where I am at the moment, the Pope will travel around around an hour south, where there is the remains of an industrial school there, a residential school. The Pope is expected to go there and meet with some survivors. So, Tracy, you can imagine just how poignant and powerful that will be as the Pope stands there in front of the building which once was one of these residential schools. These schools were operated across the country of Canada from the 17th century right up until the mid-90s. So relatively recently was when the last ones were closed. They were owned and operated and run by the government of Canada, but in many places the day-to-day running of the schools was handed over to the Catholic Church in different religious orders. Now, the main aim of these residential schools was to assimilate the Indigenous people. They were forbidden from practicing their faith, their own forms of worship, which they had been doing for so many years before that. They were even forbidden from speaking their own language. There are many stories that have come to light about abuse, both physically, sexually, and beatings that took place in so many of these schools across Canada, particularly here around Edmonton and in the West, which is why this will be so significant for the Pope to come here. This will be one of 3 steps. He's coming to Edmonton, Quebec City, where he'll meet the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and then he'll go very north to an island region called Iqaluit, with a population of just around 7,500 people. That's on his final day. Again, he will meet the people, he will listen carefully, he will hear their stories before returning once again to Rome.
And Colin, do we know, is the Holy Father expected to make an apology, a formal apology?
We don't know for sure, Tracy, if he will make a formal apology because it's not in the official schedule, but the likelihood is that he will. That's what is expected, and that is what we believe will take place. But it's important to note, Tracy, that Pope Francis has already apologized to representatives of the indigenous communities, the 3 main indigenous communities that I mentioned, who traveled to meet the Holy Father at the Vatican earlier this year. He met them across an entire week, spent hours with them, listening to their harrowing stories. The Archbishop who we interviewed was there in attendance as well, and he spoke very movingly about this. At the end of those meetings, the Pope apologized to the indigenous communities for the role that the Catholic Church played in running these residential schools and in its role in the suffering it caused to the indigenous people. But Tracy, earlier today we met with an elder from the Sacred Heart Church right here in Edmonton, and his name was Fernie Marty. He spoke about how that did bring some healing, the apology already given by the Pope, as well as the apology that was given, we cannot forget, by Pope Benedict XVI back in 2009, who also met survivors from the residential schools. But he made a great point, Tracy. He said that the land is so sacred and so important to Indigenous people here in Canada, the soil, the land that they walk on. So to have the Pope here, to have who they see as the chief of the Catholic Church here on Canadian soil, standing in front of the residential schools on that land, and to issue the apology here on this soil that I'm standing on, they think that that will be hugely significant and will hopefully be a major moment of healing and a massive boost on the road to reconciliation for the Indigenous people here in Edmonton and right across Canada.
Yeah, definitely important indeed. Colin, thank you so much for your reporting.
Thank you, Tracy.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.